South Sudan, a landlocked nation in the heart of East Central Africa, is bordered by Sudan to the north, Ethiopia to the east, Kenya to the southeast, Uganda to the south, the Democratic Republic of the Congo to the southwest, and the Central African Republic to the west. As one of the newest countries in the world, it declared independence on July 9, 2011. This came long after enduring decades of oppression, war, and unimaginable loss. But the struggle didn't end there. It was just the beginning of their story. During most of the 19th century, Egypt, which was itself under the Ottoman Empire, laid claims to all of Sudan. It established Equatoria Province in southern Sudan, but was unable to effectively control the area. However, at the turn of the century in 1899, all this changed when Sudanese administration came under an Anglo-Egyptian condominium. This effectively brought North and South Sudan under a single entity. Christianity grew in the south at the expense of Islam. But this was just the start of another bigger issue within the region, because when Sudan gained independence from the Anglo-Egyptian condominium on the 1st of January 1956, it inherited a north-south divide. Resources flowed north to the Arab-dominated elite, leaving the south largely Christian and animist in neglect. Ismail al-Azhari, the first prime minister, failed to provide a federal system of governance which had been promised to the Southerners. With Sudan's founding constitution failing to resolve key issues, multiple questions were raised. Should the nation be governed as an Arab Islamist state or as a secular one? Or even, how could a fair system of governance protect minority rights and ensure equitable representation? These unresolved issues further sowed mistrust between the North and the South. But these tensions had already started boiling over even before independence, when Southern Army officers staged a mutiny in 1955, igniting Sudan's first civil war. Southern insurgents initially fought as disparate groups, but by the late 1960s, they united under the Anyanya movement to fight against Khartoum's attempts to consolidate political power. By 1971, the movement had transformed into the South Sudan Liberation Movement, SSLM, advocating for full southern secession. An agreement was reached that led to the signing of the Addis Ababa Agreement in 1972, granting southern autonomy and essentially ending the war.
Here, and very recently, I have been to Addis Ababa to ratify the agreement, bringing to an end the civil war that took place in the Sudan.
The Abyei region, a contested area situated along the north-south border and rich in oil, later discovered in 1978, was promised the right to hold a referendum to decide whether to remain part of northern Sudan or join the semi-autonomous southern region. However, tensions over Abyei persisted as Khartoum delayed implementing this promise. The region became a flashpoint of contention. Hungry for resources, Khartoum began violating the Addis Ababa Agreement, undermining southern autonomy and pushing for control over Abyei. A few years later, in 1983, President Gaffer Nimeri declared Sudan an Islamic state and imposed Sharia law nationwide. Essentially, this action single-handedly alienated the South, sparking the Second Sudanese Civil War, which went on to last for over 2 decades. In response, the Sudan People's Liberation Army, SPLA, led by John Garang, emerged as the leading southern resistance group, seizing rural areas in southern Sudan and preparing for full-scale war. Backed by regional allies like Uganda and Ethiopia, the SPLA fought a brutal guerrilla campaign, strangling Khartoum's supply lines. The conflict devastated southern communities, with government forces using scorched earth tactics chemical weapons, and even famine as tools of war. By 1989, a military coup brought Colonel Omar al-Bashir to power. Backed by the National Islamic Front, Bashir declared Sudan a state dominated by Arab elites under oppressive Sharia law. His regime purged over 70,000 members of the armed forces and civil administration, consolidating control while further fueling divisions. Bashir's regime further intensified the war, seeing it reach horrifying levels of brutality in the 1990s. To add to this, southern communities were devastated by a famine that claimed countless lives and millions displaced as refugees. By the early 2000s, international pressure mounted against Bashir's regime, increasingly recognized as acts of genocide. The United States, under the Bush administration, passed the Sudan Peace Act in 2002, providing humanitarian aid to southern Sudan and isolating Khartoum diplomatically. This growing international intervention culminated in the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement, CPA, on January 9, 2005. The CPA granted southern Sudan 6 years of autonomy, allowed for self-governance under the SPLA, setting stage for an independence referendum. After decades of war and millions of lives lost, Southern Sudanese overwhelmingly voted for independence in January 2011, with 99% in favor. On July 9, 2011, South Sudan officially became the world's youngest nation, with Salva Kiir Mayardit becoming the first president. With independence came hope, but challenges emerged immediately. South Sudan inherited 3/4 of Sudan's oil reserves, yet relied on Sudan's infrastructure to export crude oil. Disputes over transit fees led to the Heglig crisis in 2012, a military confrontation that saw South Sudan briefly occupy one of Sudan's key oil fields. A peace deal restored exports, but economic instability persisted as global oil prices dropped in 2013. Though South Sudan began emphasizing agriculture and non-oil sectors, progress was slow as conflict consumed resources. Political instability boiled over in July 2013 when President Salva Kiir dismissed Vice President Riek Machar, accusing him of plotting a coup. By December that year, the situation erupted into civil war, plunging South Sudan into chaos. Ethnic tensions between Kiir's Dinka majority and Machar's Nuer community exacerbated the violence. Over 2 million people fled their homes, sparking a humanitarian crisis of immense proportions. In 2015, the agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan was signed, bringing a fragile hope for peace. Machar returned as vice president, but the truce collapsed in 2016. Renewed fighting forced Machar into exile. The United Nations warned of an ethnic genocide in the making. Another peace accord, the revitalized agreement on the resolution of the conflict in South Sudan, was signed in 2018, reigniting hope for reconciliation. Under a transitional coalition government formed in 2020, Kiir and Machar attempted to move forward together. However, implementation of reforms lagged, including the creation of a unified army and resolution of state boundaries. Corruption undermined governance, and climate disasters like flooding along the Nile displaced communities, worsening food insecurity. The fragility of peace remained evident as millions continued relying on humanitarian aid for survival. South Sudan's refugee crisis grew as conflict in neighboring Sudan pushed thousands of displaced people across the border to neighboring countries. Despite hosting millions of refugees, South Sudan struggled to provide resources, with over 70% of its population in need of humanitarian assistance. Hunger levels teetered on the brink of famine. Amid these challenges, South Sudan has undertaken significant nation-building efforts. Reconstruction projects aim to improve infrastructure, while reforms in education and healthcare seek to expand access to vital services. Truth and reconciliation processes work to heal deep wounds. This saw the government recently use this as an excuse to postpone the much-anticipated 2024 presidential election to December 2026, marking yet another extension of the transitional period that began in 2020. This reflects the ongoing challenges of governance and nation-building being faced in South Sudan. What do you guys think the future holds for this nation? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section. This is the post-independence history of South Sudan.